Okay. All right. I would like to just introduce myself briefly. I'm Diane McGuinn, and I'm in Great Woods, and my firm is Newfound Associates, and we do mid to senior level executive search. My background is banking, and we pretty much focus on banking and wealth management, although we've done some other industries. Zachary, do you want to share with a little bit about your background?
Sure. So my firm is Remuneration Resources. We do compensation consulting, and we help employers figure out how and how much to pay their employees, and that runs through individual pay advice, which is going to apply in this presentation, and it includes things like job structure, pay structure, incentive plan design, sales incentive design, and so on. I have over 30 years of experience working for major corporations and as a consultant. I was the head of international compensation and benefits for MasterCard. I was most recently in corporate life, the head of business unit compensation for State Street Bank in Boston. And out of my 30 plus years, 10 of them have been as an external consultant. And I like to think of the rest of it as an internal consultant to the corporations that I work for.
Great. And I've been 22 years in search, and my former life was a banker. And with the PPP loans right now, I'm glad I'm not a banker at the moment. So what I'd like to do is share the screen, and we'll get started on the presentation in case anyone has any questions right now. Okay, let's see if I can do this. Okay. Okay, everybody has a full screen, correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. So the title of our presentation is An Effective and Successful Hiring and Interview Process, Be Ready for the Battle. And what we hope you do is have some takeaways today on how to find an ideal candidate, some strategies, and also how to attract them with a good compensation plan and to keep them coming back for you as an employer over the long haul. Be ready for the battle. Well, up until COVID, you know, finding good talent in a competitive marketplace was, you know, quite a challenge for hiring companies right across the board. We're still active in terms of hiring, despite, you know, COVID and other aspects that are happening out there. Onboarding through virtual seems to be working relatively okay. The battle today from human resource professionals I've been speaking with recently has to do to some extent with the multitude of resumes they have because of, you know, unemployment. But despite that fact, whether there's a shortage of talent or an excess of talent, a good process is really what's critical for success in hiring the right person. So I'm going to begin now. All right, understanding the position, the skills and attributes of the ideal candidate is where we like to start when we're working with a client or if you're in a hiring role. Identifying the key stakeholders for discussion purposes to understand the aspects of the ideal position. If it's a mid to lower level position, you probably could do it on your own. Hopefully you have some takeaways here. The hiring manager, the HR rep, and sometimes the search consultant will be sufficient. If it's a senior level position, which the nature of this presentation today is going to focus on, others might be involved so that you get a 360 look at it. That would be the hiring manager, the HR rep, search consultant, peers with interactions to the role, and subordinates. We're going to call these folks subject matter experts. And again, these are the key stakeholders that are relating to this position. It's usually about 6 to 7 individuals. We're going to move forward and coordinate a meeting of this SMEs. Could be up to a 2-hour meeting. Again, if it's a senior level position, like a director level, a CEO, a senior manager. We're going to affirm the company's mission, values, and culture. And even if, you know, if I'm an external consultant, it's important to understand that, but even internally to get everyone on the same page. We're going to move forward and establish the key accountabilities or responsibilities for the position. What we typically do is we start off brainstorming. 20 to 30 tasks that could be refined at a later date from this group of SMEs. We're going to develop those ideas into 3 to 5, key accountabilities. We're going to prioritize those in terms of importance and the time commitment that relates to those accountabilities for the position. And I would tell you to retain the full list of these 20 to 30 tasks because you'll use that on the position description later. What I selected, and Zachary and I thought was relevant, was a human resource director role because everybody can understand that role. And these are the 5 functional areas that we developed: generalist in employee relations, strategic leadership, compliance and policy administration, financial management, their budget, their HRIS systems, and program implementation in terms of employee development initiatives. We would ask our subject matter experts to also rank these in terms of time commitment. So again, we could better understand the key functional areas and the time commitment with this for this new hire. What we would do then is we would talk through some of the elements of the skills and the attributes that will be required for the position. We'll look at competencies. These are the skills required to achieve these accountabilities, the behavioral attributes, which describe how a person behaves, generally speaking, and the motivating characteristics, why they behave a certain way. Some examples of job competencies, not all, but some that we thought, would be relevant are listed. And for this particular position, HR director, we thought that employee development, planning and organizing, conflict management, leadership skills, change agent abilities, and team building abilities were competencies that we'd want to have this person possess. Behavioral attributes, some examples. Again, for the HR director role, we want someone flexible, creative, and a team player. Job motivating characteristics example. These are some, but not all. Whether they're motivated by career advancement, a quest for challenge, they're bored, they just want to be appreciated by their company, or they want monetary upside. If you can vet out up front that it's monetary primarily, you might not have the best hire. So thinking about what's motivating your candidate to come into your company is important too. Once we've done that, we just confirm the experience level, 10 years, 15, 20, certifications, educational requirements. And when we do this with a client, we might send out a survey in advance to kind of enhance the focus during the meeting. There are external tools out there as well, like TTI Success Insights. Its predecessor product offering was called the DISC, you may be familiar with. Once we understand from our stakeholders who the ideal candidate is for this senior level role, we need to create a position description. What's in a position description? Company. Describe what your company does, why you're set apart from your competition, your location, years of service, a brief mission statement of values of your company. Position summary. Here you're going to state a broad statement about the function, the responsibilities, the reporting structure, and using enticing language so the person has an interest in joining your company. Accountabilities we discussed, 3 to 5. Job responsibilities, skills and qualification, years of experience, other attributes. We want a team player. We want a visionary. We want someone that has a sense of humor. And behavioral and motivational. Here's an example of a...
Hey, how are you?
Okay, just give me 1 second. I just gotta mute myself here.
Okay. Did I wait? I should wait a minute. Somebody just joined us. All right, can I go ahead? All right. So,
Diane, I muted him.
oh, okay. So this is an example collaborating all the elements that I previously discussed. It's a human resource director role. It talks about the organization in general, the position summary, the key accountabilities, the responsibilities, the skills and competencies and qualifications that you've amassed from your SME group, attributes, oops, sorry about that, folks, and the reporting structure, an equal opportunity statement for diversity and everything else, and then who you would have to contact. Now, I'm not going to get into sourcing talent because that's a whole chapter in its own. And, you know, you folks probably know different ways to source. It's a labor-intensive process, but once you find your talent pool, and you probably rule it down to probably anywhere from 5 to 10 candidates, you want to make sure you're asking them the right questions. Now, for higher level positions, we use strategic assessment questions. This is typically used in the vetting process asked after either us as a search firm or the hiring companies, if we're not involved, have gone through some phone screening, and they come up with a group of who they feel are, you know, good candidates. It can be used after the phone screen or after you've had the initial meeting with the candidates. 3 to 4 questions that are thought-provoking, situational based, to determine how a candidate would behave under certain situations. These are critical issues within your company. So even if the person doesn't get hired, your interview process can help you solve some major problems. So it's a valid component of an interview process. The responses will tell you the depth of the candidate experience, and it'll give you a sample of their writing communication skills. Additional questions certainly can be asked at the finalist stage. Sometimes we ask finalists to do a presentation so we can see how they present. Strategic questions. One question we came up with was, based upon the COVID-19 situation, can you please describe what you did recently to understand the critical issues relevant to your workforce? And what strategies did you develop and implement in collaboration with senior management and the board? How do you see the plan of action evolving as we go forward in this changing environment? That would be an example of a strategic assessment question. Sorry about that. There's also certainly lots of information and talk on, you know, types of questions, whether it's behavioral or competency. Behavioral-based questions are open-ended questions that focus on how a candidate will handle a work situation, rather than just a rote example. What are your strengths and weaknesses, and those types of things. An example, can you provide an example of time you faced a conflict between 2 hiring managers that had to work collaboratively? How did you take care of that? Describe a time that you make an important decision that did not work out, and what would you have done differently? Competency-based questions are technically oriented, and they need these to perform the job. What is the project you are most proud of, and how did you contribute? What do you think are the most important skills required for success as an HR director? And at what point in your career did you learn these skills? What do you do next? Well, you've identified the key stakeholders. You've written a good position description. You've asked some very good strategic questions. Now you need to construct a good offer. And that's based on your compensation, to get them in the door and then to keep them coming back. I'm going to turn it over to Zachary now so he can explain to you some elements about effective communication plans, compensation plans.
All right, so perfect. Let me start sharing here. All right, so can you see my screen? Because I did something that makes me not able to see any of you.
I can see it.
All right, we'll just go from here. So thanks again, everyone. And we do have some time at the end for a Q&A, but I also am perfectly happy to have interruptions and questions as we go along. Wait a second here. Okay, so you want to be able to make a compelling offer once you've identified your candidate. And I want to tell a quick story about my personal most enjoyable hiring experience. And I have been headhunted on a number of occasions. And in this instance, I was looking for a growth opportunity, and Diane described that as a motivator. I was looking for something that would give me more challenges and opportunity to grow. And I reached out and I made an application. I was contacted and scheduled for an interview. I had a great interview with the hiring manager. And one day later, he contacted me and made me an offer. Besides the fact that I was impressed and pleased by how quickly they made the offer, he did provide full information about what the offer was. And then when I started the job a month or so later, the first day I got to work, my business cards were already made and waiting for me when I arrived. So exactly, this was an experience that I never had again, but it is an excellent example of how important it is to be timely with your response. If you spend a lot of time hemming and hawing, the candidates get nervous, they find another job, they mostly don't understand that it's not about them. They start to get paranoid and less interested. So it's important to be timely in your responses. The other thing that I wanted to share, another quick story, a friend of mine reached out to me not too long ago. He was being headhunted for a job in the Boston area. And the job was very, very interesting to him. And the prospective employer sent him a very short one-page summary that only had salary information on it. And he called me to say, how do I approach them? I have some concerns, I have some questions. And I was surprised that a sophisticated employer would offer so little information about the value that the job offers. They didn't include anything about the benefits. They didn't include anything. They had a very vague, there may or may not be an incentive program line in the offer. They didn't talk about relocation. They really didn't tell anything to the person that they were trying to attract. And I have to say, I did give him some advice about how to have good conversations, and he has accepted the job, so that's very exciting. But the message is that as an employer, it's important to be responsive and complete in how you reach out to the new hire. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the concept of a new hire premium. And we're hearing all kinds of interesting things in this time of COVID about the hiring process. But one of the things that was interesting to me, listening to a presentation the other day about unemployment applications, is that the professionals that we're mostly talking about hiring are not filing for unemployment. They are finding or retaining their jobs. So the new hire premium is generally 10 to 15%, and that's what it takes to get somebody to give up a job that they're in, even if they're motivated to leave, because often people prefer the devil they know to the devil they don't know. So in order to get them to come and know that new devil, you have to offer them some kind of a premium, which typically is 10 to 15%. And in another slide, there's a challenge associated with the figuring out what the appropriate new hire premium is, and I will discuss it briefly. The other thing that I wanted to just kind of highlight is the idea that compensation is a mix. It includes base pay, it includes incentives, and includes employee benefits, and you should discuss all of those because they're all part of the value offered. What is not here and should be considered or thought of as well, particularly when you're communicating with employees, are those non-pecuniary or non-economic benefits, that it's a good company to work for, that it's a brand that people recognize, that it's an organization that has been identified as an employer of preference, and so on. So you want to be able to make sure that your candidates and prospects are aware of that as part of the value proposition to come and join the new employer. Okay, so fair and competitive pay. You want to be both fair and competitive. And typically we think about fair as being fair relative to other people in the company doing similar or comparable jobs, and competitive as being within a range that is competitive in the marketplace. It's based on what's happening in the market. You also want to consider the person's experience and their current role in determining what the starting pay is. But the interesting challenge is that in many jurisdictions, and Massachusetts is one of them, you can no longer ask the prospect what their current pay level is.
No, you can't.
can ask them what are they looking for, and that's probably as close as you can get, but you have to be very careful not to ask them what they're currently making. And frankly,
Yep.
I think that's a good change.
So do I.
Because if you, thank you, Diane, if you
Yep.
base an offer on what somebody's making, you may not be fair and competitive. You might be able to say, oh, well, they're making $1 now, so I'm going to offer them $1.20. That's a good increase. They're going to come on over. But if fair and competitive pay for that particular job is $2, you really should be paying them $2. So that's important to consider. The other thing that comes into play here is we're talking about using these kinds of things that we need to touch on and think about with regard to periodic increases as well, not just when you're hiring somebody, but if you're giving somebody a promotion or you are giving somebody an annual or merit-based increase, you'll want to consider what's fair and what's competitive. Just again, as a broad guideline, a competitive range, and it varies as you go higher or lower in the skill level required, is typically plus or minus 20 or 25% from the median of market behavior. And that's where some compensation or access to market information becomes important, and understanding what the market for a given job is also important.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to just talk a little bit about incentives and motivation, and so you're thinking about all the different pieces, and then we'll jump right into the Q&A. First of all, we can divide incentives in a couple of different ways. I think it's important to emphasize that these things support behaviors, they don't cause them. So when we talk about incentive plans motivating behavior, they support those behaviors, but it's good management and the internal things that motivate people that are also important in getting the behaviors that you want. Management incentives are generally divided into two broad categories: short-term incentives, which are incentives that are based on performance or behavior over a period of less than a year, and long-term incentives, which are for periods longer than a year. Long-term incentives typically include equity, and for companies that aren't publicly traded or don't have equity that can be easily valued, cash is also often used in long-term incentives. Other areas of long-term incentives include deferred compensation and supplemental retirement plan contributions. So there's a lot of ways to think about long-term incentives. Short-term incentives, on the other hand, we think of as bonuses. And a bonus can be based on reaching performance targets. It could be based on profit sharing. It could be based on a lot of different things. And sales incentive plans generally are short-term incentives based on sales performance. And they also have a lot of variety in how sales incentive plans can be designed. They could be commissions. The commissions are based on a percentage of sales or a fixed dollar amount per sale, or they could be target-based and more like a more traditional bonus. If you accomplish certain things in your job, you get a particular bonus, and those for a sales force can be sales-based objectives. Okay, two other quick comments about management and sales incentives. Often there's a fair amount of discretion that is applied in the incentive environment, and you need some amount of discretion. But I did a project I've done a number of these projects, but I'm thinking of one in particular for an organization where the head of the company came to me and he said, our incentive plan needs a little bit of help, because at the end of every year, I take a look and see how much money I have left over, and then I kind of decide who I'm going to give some of it to for bonuses. And it's really not an effective approach, because my employees don't have any idea what to expect. They don't know what performance will earn them a bonus. And we really need to have a program where employees know what they're working for and what it is they have to do in order to earn that bonus. And that was a very valuable insight. And we were able to put together some recommendations that really left some discretion at the end of the year, because you never know exactly what's going to happen, or you may discover that somebody meets the objectives set out in the plan, but they do it in a way that is not as good as you would like, or they do it in a way that is underhanded or something like that. And you need to be able to have some flexibility in your final decision. The last point that I want to make about incentive plans is something that I learned early on when I was working for Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Connecticut. I was working closely with the sales organization in the design of a sales incentive plan. And the sales leadership came to me and said, well, we're selling these 5 major products, and each product has 2 or 3 subcategories. And in these geographies, we want to sell more of product A, and in those geographies, we want to sell more of product B. And we want to give the sales team 5% more if they sell a little bit more of this, and we want to give them 10% more if they sell a little bit more of that. And you can kind of hear where I'm going. It got to be extraordinarily complicated. And one of the things that I learned through that experience is that all those bells and whistles are a bad idea. You want your incentive plans to be very simple and to have a very small number of objectives and targets that are manageable and easily explainable and that are proxies for the behaviors that you want. And in fact, my theory coming out of that experience designing that complicated plan was that the sales force ended up spending more time calculating their bonuses than they spent going out and selling the products. Okay, that's what I wanted to talk about, and we'd love to open it up and have you ask us questions, and we'll be happy to answer any questions at all. So please, I guess just speak right up, because the small group, and we can handle it that way.
All right.
I've got one question for you, Zach.
Yeah.
The one thing that did come up is something that you mentioned was current and that I was not familiar with. And I forget the term that you used, but it was essentially a hiring bonus.
So I talked about what I call the hiring premium.
Yeah.
And that it's not really a hiring bonus, although thank you. I'll talk about hiring bonuses for a moment. The idea of the hiring premium is that if, let's say that someone is in a job today and they're paid competitively at a market level, and you want to recruit them to come from the company they're working for to come and work for your company. That
Okay.
hiring in a similar job, or maybe there's some upside to it, so they're coming in parallel, but they have a better opportunity to grow. In order to get them to come from their current job to work for you, you have to offer them some kind of a premium over their current pay. And that's what I was referring to. Now,
That's a one-time payment?
No, it's in the salary. So let's say they're making $100 in their current job. They're not going to come and work for you unless you offer them $110, $115, or maybe even $120 to do the same job. They'll stay in the job that they are familiar with, unless they're really unhappy and they have other motivations. But you need to offer them some kind of a premium in their pay package over what they're getting. It doesn't have to be in base pay, by the way. It could be that where they are now, they get $1 in base pay and 20 cents in incentive pay, and you say to them, well, come and work for us, and we'll give you $1 in base pay and the opportunity to make 50 cents in incentives. That provides the premium. But as fundamentally, you have to offer them a package that's more valuable than what they're making where they are.
Have you dealt with that longer term and what that means in terms of internal equity disparities?
It creates it's one of the challenges that you face in maintaining internal equity, and it's also something that leads to compression. Compression is where people in lower jobs get close to people in higher jobs, and or more importantly, people with less experience who are new in a specific role are paid as much or more than people who have been with the company for a long time doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's because of those hiring premiums, they are a big part of why that happens. And there's fundamentally no escape because people won't come for the same package for the most part.
I have a related question to that. So, you know, millennials like to share their salary information.
Yep.
And that makes what you just were discussing even more of a challenge if you just hired someone who's new and they're talking to someone who's been there 2 years and they're making more than that person. How do you handle that?
So I am a big fan of as much transparency as you and your organization can handle. Many organizations can't handle a lot of transparency, but I would encourage moving in that general direction. Matt, I think the answer to your question is that you have to explain the situation and why it is that way. And you need to be thoughtful about these kinds of things, because needless to say, you can't increase everybody that's already there every time you hire somebody new. That would be unsustainable. And I think that part of the answer is to say, well, we've structured this in a way that we're competitive. This is our competitive range. Our challenge with bringing new people in. If everybody continues to do well, everybody will continue to grow. And just say, it's the new higher premium. We would never get the new people that we need if we didn't pay a little bit more, and that's why they're paid similar to you. And the other part of it, though, is you can say, yes, that's true. They are new to the company, but they're not new to the kind of work that they're doing. They have similar, I mean, it's going to be very situational based on the exact facts and circumstances. The other part of it is to say that's what the market demands. And I have to admit that I have had to say to people, well, if you think that you can get paid more somewhere else, we'll be very sad to see you leave. But if that's what you feel you have to do, that's what you have to do. And more often than not, it doesn't come to that. And I mean, you say that, but the person stays because they realize that they can't do better somewhere else, or that they would be more happy somewhere else.
And then I was wondering what your thoughts are, because you mentioned equity for, senior management. A lot of my clients are, I'll say small, medium firms, let's say 5 to 20 million. They're closely held by maybe one or two owners. I've always told owners that, offering equity to an employee, even a senior, a very key person, is totally useless in my experience, because unless they're funded by VCs or have some exit strategy in the near future, the person wants the stock badly, but as soon as they get it, they don't value it, because there's no place they can go to see what it's worth. And what are they going to do with it? Unless they're paying dividends, there's no ongoing value to that employee.
Right.
And then you're tied in, and if I can interject on that too, Zach. Not only that, then what you've done is you've also given yourself a new partner that is a pain in the butt.
Right.
And that's a whole other different.
No, but there is a good way to address that, and that's through what's popularly called phantom equity. You give someone a unit of value that tracks the value of the company. So you say, and it's cash, but you say to them, look, I still own it 100%, but we've said this is what the company's worth. The company's worth $1,000, and we've created 1,000 units of phantom equity. And when the company is worth $2,000, your one unit is now worth $2. And we'll pay that to you in cash, not in dividends.
Okay, Zach, and coming from, and I don't know how, I'm sure it's success fees. Almost everybody on here is based on a success fee, but the one I'm most familiar with would be probably Ken's model and my model, having come from the mortgage industry, is success fee based on a number of transactions. And when you're hiring people that are producers, your finders, if you will. Yeah. I've always found that, and I'm actually participating in this as USA 500, not as Joe is curious about. I'm here. So it's not about Lauren. It's not about Jen or anything like that. But having hired many, many salespeople over the years, I always found that I overpaid on the base compensation, and have always provided a generous commission schedule, which for the type of people I was hiring, which are producers, made more sense. Everybody on here, and I say Ken because he has his own business too, but on the insurance side, you're paid for what you get. You eat what you kill, right? So to speak. And I've always found truly successful producers aren't even looking for a base salary. And I know in the insurance industry, they don't give a base salary at all. You come in and
Right. So I talked about the components, but I didn't talk about the mix. The mix is what proportion of the compensation is base pay, what proportion is incentives. And it can vary a lot. And it will depend on, for salespeople, it will depend on the type of sale. Because if it's a sale that an individual requires a big team to make, or it's a very long sales cycle, or a very low risk but long-term sale, they're going to be looking for, and you're going to need to design a mix that has more base pay and relatively less incentive pay. If it's hot and heavy, quick turnover, lots of sales, and it's salespeople, producers like you're talking about, who believe that they pay themselves, then they often will be perfectly happy with no base pay whatsoever, 100% commission. There are trade-offs there for you in the design of the plan. So if you learn that the market total compensation for a given job is X, and you want to figure out a mix that's, let's just say one mix alternative option is 50% base pay and 50% incentives, assuming they achieve their target performance. You're going to end up, because there's more pay at risk, having to deliver more if they meet those targets at risk. In other words, so we talked about the new hire premium. There's also a risk premium. If you're asking your employee to take a greater risk with regard to how much they're going to receive in remuneration, you need to give them more upside.
Right.
And so if you're going to go to a situation where you offer a very high level of incentive, and yes, that is common with producers because they are often more driven by money, not by the money for its value, but by the money as a measure of success. If I make more money, I'm more successful. It's not that they need the extra dollar, it's that they need the value of the extra dollar to spend it. It's that they need the recognition of the extra dollar as a measure of achievement.
Some clients
that way.
Some clients that I have, in more of the mid-range sales level type positions, we will give them an option, whether it's a higher base and a lower commission or even no commission. And we say, these are two programs available to you. Which is your preference? And those that are very effective producers will go for no base, as long as the incentive is uncapped and it's competitive. And those that are a little more conservative, that maybe aren't as quite high top level producers, they will go for the base salary for the security component.
Right. So that could be a screening question in an interview process. If they answer that they prefer this, you can say, wait a minute, you're going to be too risk averse for how I want you to behave, or vice versa. You're going to be too risky for how I want you to behave.
I was going to say, instantly, as soon as somebody said I'd prefer I'd prefer a salary and no commission, that would be, for me, I'd run from
I'd be
that.
scared.
Right, but it depends what you want them to do, whether or not that's the right response.
But it's an interesting thing. A lot of people that are looking for jobs ask, is there equity offered? It comes up routinely with folks in the wealth management business, quite frankly, that are going into boutique RIA firms. And, what I would say is that there is the promise of it very often. It's less frequently delivered to people. There is the promise of it that lures them in. It's less frequently delivered. And when it's delivered, they do benefit with the upside of the firm in terms of the distributions that the company would provide in a high market. But firms are very careful.
Mostly in phantom. Am I guessing it's going back to the phantom?
So there's a huge challenge either with actual equity or phantom equity,
Yeah,
and that's these firms are extraordinarily hard to value. So you're almost, I think, often better off saying, look, the way you're going to participate in the success of the organization isn't through equity or phantom equity, because valuing the organization is very difficult or very expensive. It's going to be through some kind of a profit share or revenue share. The more successful the company is, and there's no reason not to be transparent, at least at some level, to say, look, we made $10 million this year and we only made $5 million last year, so we're $5 million better off. We have $5 million that we can use in ways that will help us grow the company, but it's to also reward those that made it happen. A lot of it's around communication. I think that the more open you are and the better you are with communicating to employees what rewards they're going to get in exchange for what behaviors and what work, the more motivated they are to.
So Zach, Diane, my next question is: you have somebody who comes in for the acquisition premium, or whatever you call it,
The new
essentially
hire premium. Yeah.
the higher premium. I'm sorry. You have somebody who comes in, it potentially forces it up, but then you have an issue when, let's say that you are doing, you have a sales organization. Your compensation is based on perhaps success. You might have to partially success fees and partially salary. Are you, with the new laws, particularly in like Massachusetts, where pay equity issues, I mean, I find those to be challenging because not everybody's equal, and as businessmen, and you have an obligation to your business to try to save money, right? Whether it's a man or woman, I'm going to negotiate the best rate I can when I'm hiring somebody. As far
Right.
as
So I think that is a short-sighted approach, Joe, to say I'm going to get every employee as cheaply as I possibly can.
I didn't say cheap,
and maybe
but
I'm
at a value, the best value I can. I don't necessarily equate cheap and value.
Absolutely. But I guess I would respond by saying that the best value is to pay them fairly and competitively. And it's very easy to say, well, I can get this person for 40% less than I can get this other person to do the same thing because she, and it's usually a she, hasn't got the track record earning that much because of systemic or sexism, or difference in pay. I mean, that's the reason most of these pay equity laws exist, is in order to balance pay between people who have historically not been paid as generously. And there's all kinds of explanations for it. Part of it is sexism. Part of it is social aggressiveness, and all kinds of things. But I think it's to pay fairly and equitably. So to be able to say, well, I can get this person for 40% less because they never earned that much before, but I'm expecting them to do the same job, they're going to end up being unhappy. They're going to have that conversation. They're going to say, wait a minute, why? I'll give you an example. My daughter worked for an organization for the first couple of years out of college, and she discovered that, and she worked for Brown University, and she discovered that the person doing the same thing at Harvard, who happened to be a man, was paid 20% more than she was.
So is
And
that a
had
Harvard
exactly the
versus
same
Brown issue,
experience.
or was it a male versus female issue?
It turned out to be a male versus female issue, and unfortunately, she's an industry that is, well, she's no longer in that industry. She moved on, but that is historically sexist in their pay decision making. It would probably be difficult to prove it, but when they say things to you like, they say things to you that make you feel, and my wife has had a similar experience in the course of her career. In fact, she even did have an employer say to her once, well, but he has to support his family. That's why he made more than you do in this.
That's terrible. That's ridiculous.
Exactly. So the stuff happens. And I know, and I don't think that that's what you're thinking when you're saying, well, what's the best value I can get? How little can I pay this person and still have them come and work for me? Sure, you need to be fiscally responsible, and your compensation decision-making definitely has a fiscal component because it's about spending the company's money, and most employers, payroll is their largest expense. So you need to be spending reasonably.
Yeah, and I was actually kind of I guess I brought up pay equity, but I wasn't using it in the sense of the gender differences. I was just talking about just producer differences.
So I think if you're focused on in a producer environment, that the answer is you pay yourself as a producer. I'll give you some amount of base pay. That's fine. You may even say, you know what? These are all production-based jobs. We give everybody $1 as base pay so that they have enough money to go buy groceries and pay the rent. But if you want to make out, you got to sell. And it applies the same to everybody.
Okay.
Joe,
Just a comment.
when we consult with our owners, I always tell them that it's cheaper to hire an A-level player, even if they're 20 or 30% more expensive, because they're going to do 3 to 4 times more than a B or C player.
Oh,
Absolutely.
I agree with that. I
That's true.
completely
Now,
agree with
the,
that.
the issue
there's
is finding
empirical
the A-level players, but
But that's,
No,
that's
I
where Diane comes in. She'll help you
Reward-
find
I-
a level
I-
player.
I've always believed in generous rewards for producers.
Hmm.
But but the problem is, and Zach brought it up or Diane brought it up, I forgot who, but nowadays even producers are expecting some. I never in my life worked for, and since 1993, I haven't had a salary. Everything I've ever done is based on my own production, so to speak. So I'm a big believer in, if you ask me, you're making a lot less money if you take any salary. You make more money by being a 100% producer.
Well, it depends what you do, though.
If you're,
And if the formula's right.
The sales role, if it's a
If you're
sales
producer,
role.
that's what I'm saying, producer. Yeah. And I the only reason, because I just don't know the way everybody else is compensated, but I know Ken's model, not his specific one, but I know the insurance industry model is, insurance guys can make a ton of money, but they need to produce. They need to be hustling, but a successful insurance guy is worth his weight in gold. Any producer is worth their weight in gold, and that extra premium you're talking about, Matt. But are they asking for it? And maybe Ken can answer this. Ken, are people that you're hiring, are they asking? And this is all devil's advocate and just curiosity. Are they asking for base salaries now?
I have a small organization, so I'll back up a little bit and say I joined the call today because I'm planning to hire my first entry-level person. All of my hiring over the years so far has been people that I've known. Like, oh, this is a highly competent person. He or she should come work with me. One time I asked a guy who wanted a job from me, who was an analyst, what's the minimum amount that you need to survive? And because I wasn't quite ready to hire somebody yet. He told me, so a month later I offered him that exact amount of money and said, and I'll give you, some good upside.
Right.
The one producer that I have working for me who's making a shift from being in an agency system where he was working with one company and he was, a traditional old line mutual company. He was at New York Life. And they tend to have a very different market than I do. They tend to have the life insurance business that everybody sort of understands and knows, and probably tries to avoid the calls from. And he wasn't, he was fledgling and making roughly 60 grand a year. Knowing what compensation is like in general, I knew that probably created a lot of stress on him. I said, why don't I give you a draw of 60 grand? Since there are times he's got to figure out how he can pay the rent and monthly expenses. And then we'll have, your upside. If you're doing well, you're going to make way more than that over time. It's taken a little bit longer than he had hoped and thought. I figured it would take 3 years in my business to start getting good referrals on a regular basis. And so I've asked him more than once if he wanted to have more salary. And in doing so, would make me more comfortable giving him assignments that weren't tied directly to revenue opportunities.
Right.
And he said, no,
Right.
I don't want to be Mike, who's the analyst.
Interesting.
He wants the pressure, and
What's the client guy?
he wants to be producing, even though it's taking a long time. And even though now we have this new obstacle of us all being shut-ins. And so, that's kind of what I was thinking. And
Well,
yeah, he wouldn't, in other words, he wouldn't allow me to pay him $100,000 right now and have it be, just to restructure because he wants to make $250,000.
Yeah, he's attracted to the upside.
but
Yeah,
you can.
I do appreciate that. That, by the way, gives me the freedom financially to go back to my original plan, which was to make my first entry-level hire. And so I think I'm going to hire an analyst straight out of college, probably a finance degree. And then I was wondering, Diane, maybe you know, what has hiring for college graduates been like in this spring? There must be a pullback among recruiters and large companies hiring kids out of school, right?
I have to jump to a 3:00 meeting. We have another meeting that we jump into, but you guys can stay on here. That's fine. I just have to
Hi,
jump.
Joe.
So
Joe, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Finish up. Thank you, Joe.
Super informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm gonna make you host, Zach, so it doesn't close the meeting down.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Ken, go
Ken,
ahead. Oh, right, sorry.
I would just say that, companies definitely pull back on hiring. I don't do really any entry-level positions, but just what I'm hearing, I think it's been harder for kids to find college grads or kids in college to find internships. But I mean, there is still hiring, if you're in accounting, if you're in the accounting profession, they're hiring accountants. And they're hiring, I would imagine, there's probably, financial analysts that are getting hired right now because, of the shifts in the assets in the market and things. So, there's definitely still hiring going on. I don't know if you were asking about the compensation relating to that level.
No, I mean, I've got a vague idea
Yeah.
of, what is appropriate and what would be attractive.
They're onboarding them virtually.
Right.
They're onboarding them virtually. I had a candidate, a senior level candidate, to join a wealth management firm, and his deal was set in like March, and he had a 60-day garden leave, so he couldn't go to another company for 60 days. And in the middle of this COVID hit and everything else, and so he wanted to make sure his company was still going to hire him because the asset value fell down and he was making pretty good money.
Yeah.
And my client, want to make sure that he was still going to come on board because his hiring company kept saying to him, don't leave now. It's not a good time to leave. So long and short, he showed up the first day that Mass opened up, met the owner of the company. They onboarded him with the office manager, and they all went home to work.
Yeah. Right.
So hiring is still happening, and I was pleased to know that if the deal still went through, because that was a search I worked on for 9 months.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
but it's still happening. There's not the volume of hiring, Ken, but there's still hiring going on.
Yeah, I took a pause, not knowing what was going to happen. So part of me was hoping there would still be attractive candidates, and I think there will be.
They're probably waiting on the sideline for you to call them.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So,
As a career coach, the kids out of college are having a really hard time, and the ones that are getting the internships are the ones that are just very tenacious and really have used their network and really have done all the applications and really reached out as soon as this happened because they knew that it would be difficult, or they had their internships revoked. There's certainly hiring going on. Some of my more senior clients, and I deal with clients that are executives, mid-level, and entry-level. And some of my more senior clients have been speaking with companies who now are more hesitant about putting them on as increasing the headcount. So several of my clients are now working for those same companies as consultants, hoping that when this all changes, the companies will be able to hire them on board as full-time employees. But there's certainly still hiring going on. I still have clients that are landing. It's just at a slower pace. And I think what's so important is that for everyone who is looking to be proactive and to make sure that they're getting that resume set and their LinkedIn profile updated and doing everything that they can now, even in terms of remote networking and the groups to join, just like USA 500, finding the best groups to really get out there and network during this time.
Well, thank you, Zachary and Diane. That was very helpful, and I took some tips that, you know, even though I knew you were talking to a different type of candidate in general, just some of those not recruiting, but the interviewing
Yeah.
tips and that process was good. Sort of reminder. It's a long time since I've been through any of that myself, so I appreciate it.
Good.
Well, Ken and everyone,
Sorry that I came in late on the end of the bandwagon, but I just, you know, from what I've heard, thank you so much. I did my interviewing process virtual, and I have to say I have hired a fabulous assistant through the
Good.
COVID-19. So I do want to just reassure you, it can be done. So it's definitely scary, and also scary hiring during financial uncertainty. Like, you know, what
Yes,
is the
it
next
is.
6 months going to be? And it really is very scary. And I think the most important thing is just be truthful, be honest, and just say, you know, look, I don't know what I'm going to be able to do 6 months out. I don't know what it's going to look like, but work with me, and we're going to, you know, stick with me. We can
Get
go
through it.
places. Is what my dad told my mom and they were married happily 42 years until she passed away, you know, and they went places. Let me tell you, first he took her from New York to Philadelphia, and that wasn't bad enough. Then he brought her to Springfield, Massachusetts.
Okay.
So, you know, but anyway, so good to see you all.
so thank you all very much. And needless
Thank you.
to say, if you have questions going forward, I know I would be happy to help you, and I feel confident speaking for Diane and saying just reach out. She'll be happy to help you answer
Absolutely.
questions going forward as well.
All
Hi,
right.
folks.
Thanks,
again.
everyone. Have a great
Bye.
afternoon.
Yep.
Take